Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss how the political model broke yet again in 2022, just as it did in 2019, only this time in Labour's favour, and why it may well be that the Tories will struggle to mend it. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So a year ago, Labour had once again overtaken the Conservatives in the polls. It was like a couple of weeks before. It was the fourth time this had happened since Tory became Labour leader. And with hindsight, we can see that it's been an extended lead. It's now lasted over a year uninterrupted, with every chance, maybe even expectation, that that will be maintained for a few years more. The Conservatives were about 10 days away from the North Shropshire by-election. They thought it was going to be very tight. That would be embarrassing enough for one of the safest Tory seats. In the event, the Liberal Democrats took the seat comfortably. The results came as a big shock to a lot of Tory MPs who thought that they'd just about sneak it, that at the very least it would be very tight. But Boris Johnson limped on for over half a year more through more scandals before being eventually ousted. But the writing was on the wall last December. But even at the time, people would say, well, yes, but there's a by-election. The Lib Dems will never hold this seat at the election. You go, well, no, of course not. The Lib Dems won't even target it. The point was that if the Tories could lose one of their safe seats in a by-election, then they could certainly lose quite a few marginal constituencies in the general election. A year ago, you could start to see the Conservatives losing their majority at the next election. But you still couldn't see how Labour would win a working majority. But now we actually think not only is it possible, it's likely. And what happened? The reason it was basically off the cards until this year was down to two main issues. First, Labour had lost too many seats. They need to win just over 120 new seats, as well as retaining their old ones, just to get a technical majority. They need to win about 150 new seats, as well as defending their current ones, to get a majority large enough to push through an agenda without excessive difficulty. That would require a beast of a campaign force. Secondly, it was difficult to know where these seats were going to come from. Labour struggled to regain power since 2010, partly down to the loss of seats in Scotland. In 2010, Labour lost power, but they still won 41 seats in Scotland. It went very badly after that, though. Labour have now got a seat, one. If Labour could regain the vast majority of their lost red wall seats and the vast majority of their lost Scottish seats, then yes, they wouldn't need to win too many others to form a government. But although the red wall has a very good chance of flipping back, or virtually all of it, all Labour can hope to do is make gains in Scotland. Nothing to return them to being the first party in Scotland, nothing anywhere close to where they were up until 2010. So the numbers just didn't look there. Now, what has changed to break this model is that the Tories now look vulnerable in their blue wall, just like Labour did in their red wall. Now, terms like red wall and blue wall do have fairly loose definitions, so let's just call blue wall seats those that the Conservatives have traditionally not had to worry about in an election, but are now looking vulnerable. Put a blue rosette on a donkey, and that donkey will be a member of Parliament the day after an election in one of those seats. Up until recently, anyway. It's all very much a reversal of 2019, really. There's no real way for the Tories to win the majority that David Cameron managed to claim in 2015. The party was tilting away from their main base. They reasoned, correctly, that those moderate Conservatives would hold their nose and vote for a very far-right Conservative manifesto on the basis that it was the lesser of two evils when compared with Labour at the time. But that was just retaining seats. In order to win a majority in 2019, the Tories had a similar problem in that the party was distancing itself from the policies that the usual marginal constituencies wanted. They ended up winning their large majority by taking seats with breathtaking audacity that Labour had been able to take for granted for decades. So Labour are now in the same position the Tories were in late 2019. They can win a majority, but realistically only by taking seats that the Tories have up until now been able to take for granted. In theory, the Tories just need to play a defensive game, tilt back towards their traditional support, and they could at least deny Labour that majority. They could switch the political model back to where it existed. Labour could form a minority government, struggle to get much done without a lot of horse trading with other parties. The weakness of that Labour government would give the Tories a potential route back to power sooner rather than later. And I think Sunak would absolutely do this if he could. He has, for example, this week officially U-turned on his housing reforms. There were to be targets for house building for councils in order to make good on their manifesto promise of 300,000 new homes a year being built. Now it's been dropped. Tory MPs from their heartlands, where affluent homeowners don't like the idea of more houses when they already have their own house, bugger everyone else, they blocked the plans. Red Wall Tories will be upset at this because their constituencies desperately need the measure, and for them personally, it's another levelling up manifesto promise in the bin. This U-turn from Sunak prioritises the blue wall over the red wall very clearly. In fact, there will be, at best, lip service only to levelling up between now and the election, I suspect. After all, how does Sunak win back the red wall? If you think to yourself, well, it's not happening, why bother? Why bother annoying the voters you can win back to chase after the ones you can't? But it's not a straightforward matter to bring the Conservatives back to where most Conservatives are. The rising interest rates are costing them a fortune in extra mortgage payments. For those who've paid off their mortgage, they may still be aggrieved because it's buggering their children's mortgages instead. Upset with how Brexit's playing out in farming communities, that is causing problems for the Tories, and it's not like there's an easy way back for them for that. Small business owners not enjoying the extortionately high energy costs. The 3 million excluded self-employed people who were abandoned by Sunak personally during the furlough period of 2020, they will be disproportionately former Conservative voters. They will be less inclined to trust the man who personally shafted them. It only adds insult to injury that Sunak also refuses to chase down the billions in furlough fraud, when there's 3 million of them that were denied furlough help. Sewage dumping of the waterways, of the once green and pleasant land of the Blue Wall, that's a major bone of contention. There are just so many ways in which the Tories, driven by Brexit, have moved far away from their core support. In theory, the Conservatives could adopt a strategy of pulling out all the stops, beating a quick march back to the centre ground to win them back. But the hard Brexit elements in the party won't allow it. The bulk of their MPs are still either too weak to take the fight to them or have lost heart and accepted the election's gone anyway. And on top of it all, Sunak is personally implicated in some of the damage in that relationship between the Conservatives and some of their core supporters. Really, if the Tories wanted to make a fight at the next election, I think they'd have probably done better to back someone who was very far removed from the governments of both Johnson and Truss. And they did have options if they were interested. But instead, they opted for Sunak as a route to slower decline. And I did see a suggestion that some Tory MPs are hoping that Labour's surge in the Blue Wall, Labour are now polling ahead in these Blue Wall seats, they're hoping it actually comes to their aid, because there's quite a few of these seats that are actually Liberal Democrat targets, and which, with this new broken political model where Labour are surging ahead here, they could look tasty for Labour. Obviously, Labour they'd prefer a Liberal Democrat over a Conservative MP, but they'd rather a Labour MP overall. But I would still think that when you consider what Labour need to win to get a decent majority, they are already having to target a very large number of seats as it is. And each seat that you seriously target needs extra resources. And it's not just a case of more money either. It's not just a case of getting activists out on the streets. You need to send your campaign strategists and coordinators. You need your big names to get out there as well. You know, Labour can only do that in so many places during the campaign before they risk diluting their resources too much. So I do still think Labour will take the pragmatic path of leaving the Lib Dems to their target seats. No point splitting the vote and letting the Tories retain seats which are up for falling, but this appears to be what some Tory MPs are hoping for. Also, I would suggest, from a voter's point of view, it's fair to say we're probably going to get more tactical voting for the next general election. You always get some. I think when people sniff a change of government, I think you do get more. And voters who want to use their vote to force that change of government are likely to check which alternative candidate is best placed to unseat them, probably rather than just looking at the campaign literature. So it would make no sense for either the parties or the tactical voters to allow an unpopular Tory candidate to win because those trying to unseat them weren't coordinating. So at the next election, we are likely to see the political model broken again. And remember, the only reason why Labour were able to fix their break was by a change of direction. Will the Conservatives change direction if they lose the next election? At the moment, you're not quite sure it will. So it may well be that this political model is broken for a little while yet. And if you're going to break your political model, maybe it's time to replace it with a new one. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships, and until next time, I'll see you later.